The Commander Rules Committee has made a bold move with the intent to progress the format towards making Commander casual again. This is an abrupt and surprising change due to the approach and cadence to bans traditionally from the RC, but it is overdue. That's one of the biggest problems from the RC. However, there is a lot of fault to go around, and I would argue the majority of the fault does not fall under the RC. I'm going to address the aspects of the format, players, collectors, and investors that this affects, as well as the responsibility that falls on us, Wizards, and the RC. Hey everyone, this is Blake. I'm the Highlander Hipster. I'm going to be doing this as a scripted video rather than more free form as I usually do. I think this subject is very important, so I want to make sure my thoughts are consolidated in a concise manner to not miss points and make sure I have my wording properly. So a quick rundown of me, so my cards are on the table. My background to show my stakes in the game. I am a longtime player, beginning in Onslaught. I played Magic with my brother and friends. I played with my brother and his friends' cards. I played Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh up to that point, and started buying my own cards and building my own decks when Mirrodin released. I've played most formats: Standard, Modern, Legacy, Limited aplenty, and many of Flavor of the Month sets, of course. I have taken a break from Magic like most folks as real life events happened. I have an expansive collection ranging from expensive reserve list cards to modern day current fanciest printings of staples. I have multiple copies of these banned cards, and I didn't play them prior to the banning. I saw them as unhealthy for the play experience I seek to cultivate. These opinions are my own. I've spent a few days trying to collect and articulate my thoughts as much as possible, avoiding hearing many of others' thoughts out there, so my take can be genuine and my own. Let's get started. Firstly, I would like to address the aspects of bannings in general. Bannings are bad, but necessary correction to direct a format to be a healthy and more diverse metagame. I'll repeat that because it's very important. Bannings are bad, but necessary. Bannings happen due to an imbalance of diversity. When a card becomes too polarizing and warps a format around it, if it creates non-games of Magic, it's a good sign that that card is unhealthy for the format and could be a candidate to be banned. Next, let's talk about the RC's role in this. I think the RC made the right decision in the wrong way. I don't think with the banning cadence that has been set forth, that this is in any way expected. It has been multiple years since we have had a single ban. Banning 4 cards at once is a bit too strong of a swing in my opinion. These cards have been on the watch list for quite some time, so it's not like any of these cards individually besides Nadu, who is too new to even have fallen much onto the watch list, should have been considered without warning of a ban. That being said, I think a better approach would have been to hit a card or two of these with an emphasis on more changes towards problematic cards moving forward, so players have expectations moving forward. My vote would be for Dockside and Jeweled Lotus to move sooner rather than later in terms of encouraging healthy gameplay. This announcement really promotes that from a group play. This announcement really promotes group play from people who truly love their format, have a good understanding of where they want it to be. So let's get into and talk about the cards in question a little bit. First up, Nadu. Nadu is one we will start with. It's still new enough for where players aren't too invested in it, but also probably deserves a little more time in the format to see where it lands. I do think the approach towards Nadu is the more proactive approach, which is similar to the approach with Hullbreacher. Nadu leads to game states like Paradox Engine, which also stays with the consistency of the ban policy. It has been considered by basically everybody across the board to be a design mistake. I do wish Nadu got a little bit more time to be, sort of called a problem. And some people do have this as their commander, so I think it would be more than fair to them to give this a little bit more time. But this ban seems like to be the least impactful. Most of the discussion I have today will be resolving around the other three. So next up, we'll move into Dockside Extortionist. The common saying, well, as long as Dockside is legal, X card won't be banned because it's not as bad as that, is a common saying we have locally and that flows through the online spaces. It is one of the most egregious designed for commander cards that exists, rather than the small surge of fast mana rather than the small surge that fast mana can give. Dockside gives you all the mana you could ever ask for on a 2-mana creature with an ETB in the form of treasures. It's such a disgusting card in terms of its power and effect on the game, and set up to be the most abusable card possible. I really don't know why this card was printed. This is 100% a card that should not exist just in general. What is considered by most players to be the most powerful card in the history of the game's what is considered the most powerful by players card in the game's history? The card that is the mascot of the game, the card your relatives have heard of but know nothing of Magic. That's right, Black Lotus. What if they printed a Black Lotus that can only be cast with the most important card in your deck, the card you have always have access to and have built your entire deck around? From before Commander Legends was even printed, the RC and members of the Commander Advisor Group told Wizards this card will be a problem and shouldn't be printed as such. Guess what? Of course it was. Jewel Lotus, that is. In what universe would it not be? I think this is a slam dunk ban. If Wizards is going to print cards directly into the format and the RC tells them not to, why would anybody be surprised when it catches a ban? My only surprise is how it has lasted this long in the format. There are no good gameplay aspects to this card existing. I've heard many people saying, oh, but now this card does literally nothing. Why would they ban it in a format, the only format it works in? I don't know, maybe because it shouldn't exist as they had said such. Like, I don't even know what we're talking about here, why this card wouldn't be banned. Lastly, Mana Crypt. This is the least expected for me as it is as old as the format itself. Now, time does change. Things aren't static. Just because something wasn't too good before doesn't mean it won't be too good in the future. That isn't the case for Mana Crypt, however. It is one of the most powerful cards printed in the game's history, regardless of the format, for the few that are even bold enough to allow restrict it. And with essentially no downside with the double life totals in Commander, I have no doubt Mana Crypt is a card that shouldn't have been allowed in the format from the beginning. So why now? And why not its cousin? That's right, Sol Ring. To me, if your focus with these bans is on a casual experience where the games are akin to board games, where everybody has a reasonable expectation to sit down and contribute, and less like a competitive event, which I believe was their goal and is a proper goal. The Rules Committee has stated that they aren't willing to ban Sol Ring, even admitting it probably should be banned. To me, this undermines the point of banning Mana Crypt for the same casual push that the changes intend to implement. As a mascot of the format, I understand why you wouldn't want to invalidate Commander products off the shelf. With such a drastic move and with such a large sweeping change that is, I would think not much would be off the table, though. I don't think the RC's reasoning here works for me in regards to not being willing to ban Sol Ring, but you're definitely going to ban Mana Crypt. It just falls through immediately to me for if you're going to justify Mana Crypt banning, but then try to apply the same criteria to Sol Ring and say it just doesn't work for me. But I would agree it would have. I'm in a universe where you could only ban one. If apparently that's the universe that we live in, I would agree that Mana Crypt would be the one that should go, since it has been artificially gatekept by Wizards of the Coast. Speaking of that, let's get into Wizards' involvement in the situation, an aspect I think is being overlooked. Wizards has used all three of these cards, obviously, once again, not really talking about Nadu too much in this discussion, has used all three of these cards to sell sets with tactics of artificial scarcity and heightened prices, ensuring that the drip-fed supply of these cards would remain far from accessible, essentially double dipping on using a card as a reprint to sell a product, while also allowing for future reprints to do the same. It is not with the player's best interest at heart, to say the least. A Magic card's monetary value is generally pretty strongly tied to the playability, with scarcity adding fuel to the fire. Very expensive exclusive cards, such as serialized cards, often hold a chunky price tag regardless of the card's playability, which I have no problem with because normal versions of the cards are available. However, I do take a problem with intentionally pricing players out of essentially game pieces. Wizards has a history of this practice. Just look at the extended history of fetch lands, for example. If you're trying to build a commander deck with the focus on making it better to compete with your friends, you will need these cards for almost any deck that can play them. The silver lining of this is that since these cards were gatekept from players due to the intentional scarcity from Wizards, many players didn't have these cards, meaning there's a level of soft ban happening where, due to this behavior, Wizards has allowed them to be not as in as many players' hands as it could be. However, these cards were allowed to exist in the format for far too long, meaning that their prices were allowed to inflate fester, and attract the attention of people flying by wanting to be involved in the most powerful cards in the format. So, more people decided to invest in these bloated prices. This seems to be a good time to address the investors of Magic in these cards. I'm very, very sorry this has happened. It always sucks to not enjoy things the way that you expected to when you purchase them, especially when it's out of your control. However, I think instead of flailing around and throwing vitriol, abusive language toward the RC or really anybody with a different opinion, I think it's best to look inward and see what there is to learn to prepare yourself for future changes that could occur and reassess things you thought that you knew. These cards that have been banned have been labeled as problematic for a long time. Even though the RC has shown a passive approach towards banning cards, that doesn't mean they would ever stay that way forever. These cards are clearly and have been at the top of that list. If these are cards that you purchased as an investment with the purposes of reselling, it would be hard to choose a worse group of cards. If these are cards that you bought because you love them, enjoy having them as part of your collection, and had no chance of leaving your collection, that value would never be realized anyway. Like I stated earlier, I have multiples of these cards. I'm very attached to my Mana Crypts and have no plans to let go of them. I never purchased a Jeweled Lotus for this exact reason. There was a high chance of it getting banned someday if the RC decided to start banning cards, which clearly they have. I didn't have any attachment to the Lotus. It wouldn't have been a valued piece of my collection. And it's not money I was willing to throw away if something happened. That's the main point I would like to leave this section with. Don't spend money on things that are highly risky that you can't afford to lose. Collectors prioritize things that you truly value and not what their value is. All right, let's wrap this up by talking about this. Let's wrap this up by talking about where I stand personally. I'm never going to be able to articulate all the things I have to say, but I do want to have a stopping point and try to get as many as accurately as possible. I think the gameplay that will come from this banning will be great. This really does help at a local game store level in curbing some of the disingenuous or poorly informed Rule Zero discussions that try to occur. It definitely narrows the range of outliers that could join into an unknown playgroup. There will still need to be the Rule Zero discussions, no doubt. It's still important to gauge what sort of game and that you and the other players are shooting for. But the people playing casual decks running into the my deck is a 7 for sure, I built it with cards I had around, my deck has never done this before, teehee, decks give a much more reasonable delta to have an enjoyable game with. I believe in the intentions and decisions to ban these cards from Commander for the health of the format going forward. This decision was made by people who love their format. Value of cards should be taken to only a small level of consideration if this is the purpose. All that being said, this banning was handled terribly. Going for basically being memed on for never doing anything when you haven't banned anything in nearly 3 years and our ban announcements are very minor, to making such a financially deep, large in scope, and impactful ban is about the worst possible way to handle this. It doesn't really feel like it's well thought out. I would have personally started with Dockside, then Jeweled Lotus and Nadu, then Mana Crypt, with each one getting an increasing level of warning, all beginning with the initial announcement. Being like, hey, we're banning stuff, and these are cards we're looking at, so be warned, these are cards that we are starting to ban towards. Nadu is expected either way for the previous precedents, but I would have preferred, once again, to at least give it a little fair warning to help set expectations. The real problem is how long these cards have lasted in the format. These bans should have already happened some time ago, but that doesn't mean we should start swinging all at once. People losing their minds online are always expected when a ban announcement happens, even when it's for a format they don't even play. People love being sensationalists and dramatic online, but that's no excuse for being disgusting and threatening members of the RC or anyone else because they disagree with you or tell you to chill. If you're one of those people, go fuck off for a little bit. Spend your time on something else. Take a walk, log off, go to your community service. I don't care what you do, as long as it's not anything related to Magic the Gathering. Nobody in this community, or probably any community really, wants any actions like that involved in what they do. Seriously, go talk to some real people and get some real help or something. This outrage is the most expected it could ever be, though. I really don't understand why the RC took such a bold approach. I've been consistent throughout on being very anti-banning of cards outside of cards that completely devolve games. The cards that make no room to have a reasonable game that they are involved in, All of these cards are much more in that category than many of the cards that exist on the ban list. All in all, I think it's important we take a look at our approaches to our engagement of the game. I am someone that's had to do that many times of late, as Wizards keeps making decisions I don't like, agree with, or think is good for the long term health of Magic. I think their focus on making every dollar possible is going to lead to the next generation of truly invested lifers in Magic. I carry a lot of that weight on myself to try to bridge that gap within the scope that I can. But sometimes I have to go and easy on myself and just focus on enjoying the game the way that I do. Maybe this is a wake up call for you. There are many aspects of the game that are out of your control. All these are these things you can reconcile. Do you truly enjoy this hobby that you're involved in? Is this the energy into this hobby focused on the right things and going into the right direction? This game has been a major part of my life. Like anything else, there will be trials in your faith and things that are out of your control. Make sure you're spending your time on your make sure you're spending your time, your most valuable resource, on something that is worth it to you. This event for me has reinforced my beliefs for the format, but what does it mean for you? Thank you for your time. Be good to yourselves. Be good to one another. This has been Blake, the Highlander Hipster.